Portuguese colonialism and the creation of the Lusophone world, the first wave of European colonization. Since the advent of the Age of Exploration in the late 15th century, the country of Portugal has spearheaded the initiative of transnational trade and subsequent colonization of many parts of the world. That being so, such a small nation nestled in the west of the Iberian Peninsula, growing to be the predominant seafaring and commercial trading power of Renaissance-era Europe, comes as a surprise to one who is not familiar with the history and achievements of the Portuguese people. Nevertheless, it would be remiss to mention these grand successes without referring to their subjugation, seizure, and exploitation of the land, people, and resources found therein. The deep impact of early Portuguese colonialism on modern Lusophone societies across the world cannot be understated, evident through both the histories and contemporary societies and cultures of the colonized nations in areas such as religion, race, and language. The outward expansion of the Portuguese crown began in 1415, when the city of Ceuta was conquered from the Moors in North Africa. Further courses were taken into the Atlantic and West Africa by Henry the Navigator, and eventually, in 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope off of southern Africa, reaching the coast of Brazil 2 years later. Ostler, pages 383-385. And with the conquest and trade flowed ideas and language, both of which still have their presence in today's world. The Portuguese spread Christianity as their duty, being defenders of the faith to their trading outposts in Mozambique, Goa, Malacca, and Macau, among others. Ostler, 387. Goa retains a Catholic minority today, and 62% of Mozambique is Christian, with 27% being reportedly Catholic. U.S. Department of State. Portuguese was the lingua franca of the commercial and religious world for hundreds of years, lasting up until the 18th century, long after Portugal's international importance had waned. Ostler, 388. The language was often pidginized to suit the needs of missionaries and merchants, adopting a variety of local words as conversational medium between the Portuguese and those they encountered. Even today, Portuguese remains widely spoken throughout the world in places like Brazil, Angola, Goa, and Timor-Leste. Portuguese was also spread generationally through native Africans and their descendants. New slaves would by necessity learn the language of their masters, and, due to the primarily male demographic of the Portuguese settlers in places like Brazil, female slaves would beget their children who also learned Portuguese. Ostler, 391. The very demographics of the nations which came into contact with Portugal were changed through various ways, slavery being the primary method. The Portuguese at first used native Amerindian labor in the selling of Brazil wood, as the native men often cut these trees in their everyday lives in exchange for trinkets and artifacts. However, with the birth of the plantation-based system industry in Brazil, Amerindian men would not work for any price, as in their cultures, field work was seen as the woman's job. Johnson, 265. They were thus enslaved by the Portuguese plantation owners, with difficulty, and used as labor roughly up until the first Old World diseases began to arrive by ship to Brazil, carried by their passengers. These diseases killed large numbers of Amerindians who had no immunity to them, and their labor began to be replaced by slaves taken from Africa. Johnson, 274. The slavery of Africans was justified several times by papal bulls on the basis that they were pagans and did not follow Christianity. Vietti da Costa, 46. Other racist ideas propagated as to why they should be enslaved, such as their dirtiness or beast-like tendencies. Vietti da Costa, pages 48-49. But regardless, they were brought over in large numbers to Brazil, as noted in colonial Brazil. In 1570, an early historian of Brazil, Magalhães de Gandavo, estimated that there were between 2,000 and 3,000 blacks in Brazil. 17 years later, José de Anchieta put their number at 14,000. Though on certain estates, Indian slaves still outnumbered Africans at the end of the century, the growing reliance on black slaves, about whom there were few with any moral qualms and no royal legislation, diffused to a large degree the issue of Indian slavery. Johnson 274. Slavery was already in practice in the Congo area of Africa, carried out by Arab slave traders and tribal chieftains, but the extent to which the Portuguese increased it is exponential. Many chieftains would convert to Christianity and trade slaves for European commodities, the Portuguese treating them as equals at first. As the number of slaves being exported grew, the King of Congo in 1526 wrote a letter to King John III of Portugal, explaining that merchants began stealing people from their lands, the nobility was taken, and the country was being depopulated, that they no longer wanted Portuguese traders coming for more slaves, but it was all in vain, as the Portuguese now had the upper hand in the exchange, demanding that chieftains respect their prior agreements with the Portuguese crown. Viotti da Costa, pages 51 to 53. Essentially, slavery was a crucial asset of Portuguese colonialism, with the massive number of slaves exported to Brazil and other colonies like Cabo Verde producing a great wealth of crops, mainly sugar. And, as previously mentioned, enslaved women often bore the children of the Portuguese settlers, leading to a large mulatto population alongside the large African presence. Those of Portuguese descent were favored even after Brazilian independence, and to this day, the socio-economic status of many Afro-Brazilians is extremely low. Of the estimated 227,087 people living on the streets of Brazil, 69% are black, neto. It cannot be said enough that the Portuguese and their presence across the world is essential to how many modern countries base their histories around today. From the persistence of Christianity to the continuance of spoken Portuguese as a medium of communication to the ethnic diversity of places like Brazil, the Portuguese have left their impact across the world in many ways. Taking into account their atrocious actions with other good intentions that came before them, one may view the former empire of Portugal as cruel and greed-driven. But nonetheless, the products of their colonial domination are over 250 million strong in 2023 and are all united together through a shared history and language. With acknowledgement of its colonial crimes, Portugal takes a stand to aid its former territories, sharing relationships spanning more than 400 years.